There is a silence that follows tragedy, but the silence that follows losing your child, your grandchild, that silence is not human. It's something else, something no mother, no grandmother should ever have to live through. Her name was Sandra Rzucek, and once she had everything a woman could dream of. A daughter named Shanann, full of light. Two grandbabies who made her world brighter every day, Bella and CeCe. A family bound together by love, survival, and faith. Until one man, the one they had welcomed, took all of it away. This is Sandra's letter. Her voice, her grief, and above all, her truth. In 2009, Shanann Watts stood in front of the house she built with her own hands. It wasn't just concrete and wood. It was the start of her second chance at life. She was battling lupus, an autoimmune disease that makes even the simple things, like getting out of bed, feel like climbing a mountain. But Shanann wasn't the kind to quit. Every wall she painted, every cabinet she picked, every room she designed, it was part of a dream. She wanted to flip the house, make a profit, and someday be mortgage-free. It was a bold move for a young woman in pain, but Shanann was bold. Always. Then one day, she got a Facebook friend request from a man named Chris Watts. A quiet, reserved guy, introduced through a mutual friend. Months later, she called her mom and said, "Mom, I met someone. He's a mechanic. He's nice." Sandra's response was simple. As long as he treats you right, and you're happy, that's all that matters. At first, Chris seemed like the answer to her prayers. Supportive, soft-spoken, steady. He didn't just walk into her life, he was invited, welcomed, and for a while it worked. It started with a cookout. Chris and Shanann invited both their families to meet. Burgers on the grill, drinks in hand, a sunny backyard. The kind of gathering that feels like the start of something real. Sandra and her husband, Frank, were hopeful. They came with open arms. Chris's parents, Cindy and Ronnie, showed up too. But something was off. Sandra remembers it clearly. Shanann, excited and anxious, was buzzing around, waiting on them hand and foot, trying so hard to make a good impression. But when Shanann stepped away, Cindy leaned into Sandra and said, "She was married before, wasn't she?" Sandra replied gently, "Yes, just like your daughter was." But it didn't stop there. Later, when they were alone again, Cindy said something colder, something that chilled Sandra's heart. "I just don't see it. I don't feel that your daughter loves my son." It was the first red flag. Sandra had seen this before, in her own mother-in-law. She knew when someone was preparing to wedge themselves between a couple. From then on, every cookout, every gathering, came with tension. Chris's mother and sister, Cindy and Jamie, stayed distant. Quiet. Cold. The message was clear. You are not one of us. But Shanann, she tried anyway. The engagement came next. A ring. A promise. A new start. Shanann threw herself into planning. She and Sandra went shopping for food, wine, decor, everything. Chris's sister, Jamie, suddenly asked to help with the invitations. Shanann was thrilled. Mom, she said, Jamie wants to send out the invites. I think she's finally accepting me. Sandra was cautious. But Shanann, she believed the best in people. The night of the engagement party came. Tables were set. Food was served. But when the doorbell rang, only immediate family came. Shanann, confused, started calling guests the next day. They never got the invites. She was heartbroken. Chris was upset too. But that moment made one thing clear. Don't expect them to show up again. And when the wedding day arrived, they didn't. No Cindy, no Ronnie, no Jamie. Not a single member of Chris's immediate family attended. Just his grandmother and an uncle. Not a call, not a gift, not a seat filled. But even with that hole in the crowd, Chris and Shanann were in love. They held each other close. They danced. They kissed. They chose each other. And then they moved forward as a team. Shanann and Chris moved to Colorado to start fresh. They lived with one of Shanann's close friends while their new home was being built. They worked hard. Chris as a head mechanic at a Ford dealership. Shanann selling cars, quickly becoming a top salesperson. They were a team. They laughed. They planned. They FaceTimed Sandra and Frank every night for 4 years straight. Then came a cancer scare. Shanann noticed something abnormal on Chris's body. She pushed him to see a doctor. The diagnosis was serious, but it was caught in time. She saved his life. Not long after, Shanann got pregnant with Bella Marie. Chris was thrilled. So was everyone else. Shanann left work to focus on her high-risk pregnancy. Lupus made it harder, more dangerous, but she handled it with grace. After Bella, she worked nights at a children's hospital, then began selling travel bags on the side, hustling for her family. And then CeCe came along. Another pregnancy, even riskier. Severe water weight, fatigue, chest pain. She could barely breathe. Sandra and Frank didn't hesitate. They sold everything, except their house, and moved to Colorado for 15 months to help raise the girls and support their daughter. That's the kind of love Shanann had around her. But not from everyone. It was supposed to be a simple visit. Just a few days where grandparents could spend time with their granddaughters. Play. Laugh. Share love. But instead, it became a quiet war. Chris and Shanann had a business trip planned. A company event with Lavelle, her health and wellness business. They would be gone for 4 nights and 5 days. So Chris's mother, Sandra Watts, flew to Colorado to stay with Bella and CeCe while Shanann's parents, Sandra and Frank, remained close by. At first, everything seemed fine. But the moment Sandra and Frank tried to visit, they were turned away. Not once, but every day. No dinners. No playtime. Not even a moment to hold their grandchildren. Cindy took the girls upstairs and stayed there. When asked why, her response was cold. What the hell am I here for? Then she snapped. In front of Bella and CeCe, she screamed in Sandra's face. Accused her of being controlling. Sandra stood there, stunned, shaking, humiliated. She texted Shanann over and over. Something's wrong. I don't feel right. Why is she keeping the girls from us? Shanann, always the peacekeeper, replied. Relax, Mom. I'll take care of it when we get back. But something in Sandra had already shifted. Something in her heart said, this isn't about a visit. This is a warning. She would never speak to Cindy again. 17 months later, Sandra and Frank were back in North Carolina. They had returned home after helping Shanann through CeCe's difficult birth. And that's when Shanann planned her final summer trip back east. 6 weeks to reconnect with family before Bella started school. She wanted the girls to finally meet Chris's sister, Jamie, and to spend time with extended relatives they rarely saw. The first weekend went fine. Shanann stayed with Sandra for a week, then visited Cindy and Ronnie for the weekend. Chris hadn't arrived yet. He was still in Colorado. But that second weekend, everything went wrong. On Saturday, Shanann called her father in a panic. "Come get me. Now." Her voice was urgent, afraid. She explained that Cindy had tried to give the girls ice cream. Ice cream with peanut chips. Both Bella and CeCe had severe, life-threatening nut allergies. Even trace amounts could send them into anaphylactic shock. Shanann asked calmly, "Cindy, what kind of ice cream is that?" Cindy laughed it off. "Relax. It's just ice cream." But Shanann knew better. She asked to read the ingredients. Cindy refused. Instead, she called Shanann scary, dismissed her as overprotective. And while Shanann walked outside with the girls, something else happened. A large bowl of peanuts appeared on the kitchen table. It hadn't been there before. It hadn't been part of the snacks. It was just sitting there, waiting. Shanann called her mother, nearly in tears. "Mommy, I'm being double-teamed. I'm so tired." Sandra was horrified. But then Shanann said something else, something that chilled her to her core. There were open razor blades just laying around the house, too. When Sandra asked what she meant, Shanann quickly changed the subject. She knew her mother, and she knew Sandra would have rushed over and made a scene. And maybe she should have. After that weekend, Shanann never went back to see Cindy again. She had reached her limit. The passive aggression, the coldness, the danger. It was no longer about boundaries. It was about survival. When CeCe's birthday came, no one from Chris's family showed up. Cindy mailed a gift instead. It sat unopened in their Colorado home, a box full of silence. But back in North Carolina, Shanann made the most of the time she had. She spent the rest of her trip with Sandra, Frank, and her brother, Frankie. The girls laughed. They danced. They ran in the grass like nothing could touch them. And when Chris finally flew in for his week, Shanann and the girls rushed to the airport, set off alarms from running too fast, screaming, "Daddy!" But Chris wasn't the same. At first, Shanann couldn't put her finger on it. Chris was distant, cold, like someone had replaced him with a shell of himself. He didn't talk. He barely touched her. When she vomited through the night, he didn't get up to check. He had excuses. There was a storm, the streetlights weren't working. His phone had poor signal, he was tired. Shanann tried to be understanding, but even the girls noticed. When they all went to Myrtle Beach for a quick family trip, the tension boiled over. Chris drove ahead with Shanann and the kids. Sandra followed behind, struggling to keep up. "Why is he driving so fast?" she texted her daughter. "Tell him to slow down. I'm not racing to dinner." At dinner, Chris left the table multiple times. He ignored CeCe when she tried to make him laugh. He avoided eye contact with Shanann. Later that night, Sandra asked, "Is everything okay?" Shanann replied with a weary smile. "Chris is Chris." She always defended him, even when the love was slipping through her fingers. For 4 years straight, Shanann and her family FaceTimed Sandra and Frank every night. It was their tradition. A digital lifeline, laughter, updates, bedtime giggles from Bella and CeCe. No matter what was happening, that call came in. But starting in late May 2018, something changed. Chris began controlling the phone. When Sandra and Frank called, he'd answer, but the camera no longer showed Shanann or the girls. Just ceilings, floors, walls. It felt strange, almost deliberate. Sandra would ask, "Chris, are you okay? Where are the girls?" He'd mumble something, move the camera again, then end the call quickly. One night, Shanann stepped out of the room briefly. Celeste had a rash and went to get a cloth and cream. Chris stayed on the call, holding the phone. Sandra, being a trained aide, said, "Let me see how bad it is." Chris positioned the camera directly on CeCe's private area. Sandra was horrified. She told him to move the camera. He didn't. When Shanann returned, Sandra texted her, angry and shaken. Shanann apologized, said she'd handle it, said she understood. But Sandra's heart ached. Something is wrong, she thought. He's not the man we thought he was. Beneath the smiles on Facebook, beneath the posed pictures, the videos of CeCe dancing and Bella singing, was a quiet storm no one could see. Sandra and Shanann talked often about the challenges they faced. The girls had been misdiagnosed for years: constant coughing, breathing issues, sleepless nights. Shanann finally pushed to see a new PA, and at last, both Bella and CeCe were properly diagnosed with asthma. Steroids helped. Their health improved, but it wasn't just their lungs that ached. CeCe's esophagus was too small. She underwent 3 surgeries to widen it, just to eat and breathe normally. Add ear tubes. Add back-to-back appointments. Add rising medical debt. And then came Shanann's next surgery. $25,000 out of pocket. The bills piled up. So did the stress. Sandra began to see it more clearly, in Shanann's face, in her voice. She was tired, Sandra would later say, but she never complained. Shanann still put everyone else first. And Chris? He was starting to disappear. Chris finally flew to North Carolina for a brief visit before Shanann's return to Colorado. When Shanann picked him up at the airport, the girls sprinted into his arms. They were so excited, they set off the alarm. It should have been a joyful reunion. But Chris barely said a word. He spent time with his parents while Shanann took the girls back to her family's house. When he returned, Shanann asked to speak privately on the back porch. They talked for hours. She confronted him. About his distance. About the peanut incident. About how she felt ignored, unloved, invisible. Chris listened. Quiet. Stoic. Cold. He didn't fight. Didn't cry. Didn't hold her. Just nodded. That night, Shanann vomited violently. Chris never got up to check. Sandra stood outside the bathroom door, trembling, watching her daughter break. And the man who once swore to protect her, do nothing. They tried to salvage the trip. A few days at Myrtle Beach. Sandcastles. Waves. Matching swimsuits. The girls laughed. They ran toward the ocean, their tiny footprints fading behind them. But Chris was gone. Not physically, emotionally. He sat by himself. On his phone. Avoided conversation. Avoided touch. At dinner, he stood up from the table multiple times. Bella cracked jokes. CeCe made silly faces. Chris didn't even look. Sandra pulled Shanann aside. What's going on? Shanann forced a smile. Chris is Chris. That was all she could say. That was all she had left. Sandra remembers the ride home. She followed behind their car, trying to keep up. Chris was driving fast, reckless, almost. Sandra texted Shanann mid-drive. Tell him to slow down. What's the rush? I'm not in a race to get to dinner. Shanann didn't respond, but her eyes said everything. The last week in North Carolina passed like a fog. Shanann tried to smile, to breathe, to hold her daughters a little tighter. But Chris barely noticed. His hugs were mechanical, his eyes distant. Even Bella began asking why Daddy didn't want to play. The trip ended quietly, too quietly. At the airport, the girls hugged their grandparents. CeCe cried. She didn't want to leave. Bella whispered, "See you soon, Grammy." Sandra didn't know it then, but that was the last time she would see them alive. She held on to Bella a little longer, kissed CeCe's curls, watched them disappear through the glass doors. She felt something, a strange tightening in her chest, an invisible pull. God, she whispered in the parking lot. Please keep them safe. She never imagined what was coming. It started with silence. Shanann was supposed to have a doctor's appointment that morning. She had just returned from a business trip. Pregnant. Tired. Carrying her 3rd child, Niko. But when her friend, Nicole Atkinson, couldn't reach her, she knew something was wrong. No answer on the phone. No updates. No movement. Police were called. A welfare check. A search. At first, it was just worry. Then fear. Shanann's car was in the garage. The children's car seats were still inside. Her phone and purse were in the house. But Shanann was gone. Chris arrived shortly after. Casual. Unbothered. He offered theories. Said maybe she left. Maybe she was at a friend's. but everyone could see it. Chris wasn't looking for his wife. He was stalling. And then, the lies started unraveling. Sandra was at home when the phone rang. Frank answered. It was Niko. Shanann was missing. The girls too. Sandra's knees buckled. The phone dropped. Her world collapsed. In that moment, every breath, every second, felt surreal. It can't be real. This is a mistake. Shanann wouldn't just disappear. Sandra clung to hope. But with each passing hour, it faded. Then came the words no parent should ever hear. Chris failed the polygraph. He confessed. They're all gone. Shanann, Bella, CeCe, and the baby, Niko, never even born. Chris, the man they welcomed, fed, sheltered, had strangled Shanann in her sleep, then taken the children, alive, to an oil site, where he ended them too. Bella's last words would haunt the world. Daddy, no. The funeral was a sea of white roses. Tiny caskets. A mother buried with her unborn child. Sandra stood beside Frank, unable to breathe. The sound of CeCe's favorite songs playing in the background. Pictures of Bella holding her baby sister. The news cameras didn't stop. Neither did the trolls. Online, strangers blamed Shanann. Called her controlling. Said she was too much. Sandra watched in horror as her daughter was attacked in death, while her killer sat in prison, barely blinking. That's when she decided to write the letter. To tell the truth. To put it all out there. From the first Facebook friend request, to the peanuts, to the vomit in the bathroom. Sandra wrote to Detective Dave Baumhover, the man who had worked tirelessly to bring justice. And in that letter, she poured out her heart, her grief, her warnings, her love. It was the only way she could scream, in a world that wouldn't stop talking over her daughter. After the burial, the world moved on. News channels aired segments. Podcasts broke it down. True crime forums speculated and dissected. Chris became a headline. Shanann became a hashtag. But for Sandra, time froze. The house was too quiet. The FaceTime ringtone she once heard every night. Now a ghost sound in her head. CeCe's little boots sat by the door. Bella's drawings still on the fridge. Shanann's old room untouched. And every morning, Sandra woke up to the same question. How do you live after burying 2 generations of your family? There were no answers. Only pain. And the need to speak. Shanann gave everything. Even when she was sick, exhausted, broke, or rejected, she kept giving. She saved Chris from cancer. She carried their children with broken ribs and chronic pain. She gave him love, loyalty, and a second chance at life. And he repaid her with a grave. He took her life, then took her children's, then dumped their tiny bodies in crude oil tanks, as if they were nothing. But they were everything. They were light. They were music. They were bedtime songs and Christmas mornings. And they are not forgotten. Sandra Rzucek wrote her letter because too many people wanted to rewrite her daughter's story. To blame her. To erase her. To excuse a man who didn't deserve the air he was breathing. But she won't let that happen. Not while she's alive. So she told the world everything. Even the things that were hard to hear. Because Shanann's truth matters. Bella's truth matters. CeCe's truth matters. And the silence that follows evil must be filled with memory and love and truth. This documentary is not just about a man who took lives. It's about a woman who built one through pain, love, and resilience. It's about daughters who danced in the kitchen, laughed at bedtime, and never got the chance to grow old. It's about a mother who watched it all slip away. If you've watched this far, don't let their names fade. Remember Shanann. Remember Bella. Remember CeCe. And remember Niko. Even if he never got to take his first breath, evil tried to bury them. But we will lift them up again and again with truth. Because love survives, even when people don't. If this story moved you, please like this video. Memo subscribe to the channel. Megaphone share Shanann's story with others. Let's drown out the noise. With truth, with dignity, and with love. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.